I want to bring in Firas Maksad, Managing Director for the Middle East and North Africa for the Eurasia Group. Also with us, Colonel Jack Jacobs, Medal of Honor recipient and MS Now military analyst. Colonel, what kinds of considerations are service members potentially having to make today?
Well, you have to distinguish between the considerations of people at the bottom of the food chain and those who are at the top and who are closest to the President of the United States. If you're at the bottom of the food chain, you need to do whatever you're told unless you're given an order that's immoral or illegal. And for those who are not in leadership positions, that means taking account of the tactical situation around them. And there are some things that are intuitively obvious to the casual observer you're not allowed to do, and whose order to do so you not only can refuse, but you must refuse. However, if you're at the top, if you're one of the leaders with wearing stars, you're an advisor to the President of the United States, you're the leader of your service, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, you have an obligation to make sure that not only don't we do anything immoral or illegal, that we also don't do anything that's stupid. And the consideration of what is immoral or illegal is very much different at the top of the food chain than it is at the bottom. And if we're going to avoid doing something we should not do, the buck is going to stop with the people at the top of the military food chain.
Colonel, I also want to tell you about something that Kevin Barron, who I just spoke to, had to say. He's the former VP of Pentagon Press Association. He said he's never been more nervous for a night like this in his career. And Congressman Adam Smith just shared a similar sentiment with me. Take a listen.
I'm deeply worried about it. I basically share everything that your previous panel said. I mean, this is an unprecedented place for the United States to have gone. Republican sycophants in Congress who want to say, oh, come on, you can hit bridges, you can hit power plants because they're connected to the military, which theoretically is true, but that is not what the lunatic in chief has been saying. He has made it very clear that his plan has nothing to do with military targets. He wants to erase a civilization and punish the entire population of Iran.
I understand what you say, Jack, about the decisions that are being made at the top of the food chain. But to folks lower down on the food chain, the rank and file and the men and women who maybe now or may in the future be putting their lives on the line for this, does that pressure, does that fear trickle down?
Well, A, it does, and B, it's also pernicious. When you have an attitude that does, in fact, no matter what you do, and an attitude like that filters down through the chain of command, then it is it's very, very dangerous for the use of the military instrument of power and its place in the panoply of the things that we can use to defend ourselves for the future. We have to remember one thing, however, and that is that the use of the English language has never been Donald Trump's strong suit. You remember a couple of days ago, maybe it was a week or two ago, President Trump said that we had regime change in Iran. Well, that's not true because the president doesn't understand what a regime is and how it differs from the people in the government, how regime is different from government. So we maybe it's grasping at straws, but we may want to take what he says with a grain of salt, Chris.
So, Firas, right now, Iran says they're defiant. They're ready to fight back against President Trump with this threat to eliminate the entire civilization unless the Strait of Hormuz is reopened tonight. Iran's president says now that he and 14 million people are willing to die for this war. He claims that's how many people have answered their call to build human chains around power plants. Is he right? Do you believe millions of people inside Iran are ready to die for this?
Chris, this is a regime that's been deeply unpopular for years in Iran, that had to kill tens of thousands of its own people before this war even started, only to maintain its grip on power. Now, that said, the statements and the ultimatums coming from the White House, the threat to annihilate an entire civilization, to bomb its infrastructure, bomb its bridges and power plants, those are deeply counterproductive, because those are the kinds of things that feed into the regime narrative that America is out to destroy Iran and not to undermine the regime. If this regime is going to be replaced by anything, its ideology of the Islamic Republic is bankrupt. But if it's going to be replaced with anything, it is going to be something that is deeply dependent on a sense of Iranian patriotism. And so to be pushing up against that force of patriotism and to push the regime to be able to benefit from that, just as they did when President Trump threatened a few weeks ago to have a Kurdish insurgency that would essentially bring Iran apart and would have factions, ethnic factions break away. Again, that fed into the regime's support base and the regime's narrative. So I worry about those deeply, I would say, misguided statements that keep coming out of the White House that do not seem to have a grip of what's actually moving the Iranian people.
Yeah, and maybe it's obvious, but you can still love your country even though you hate the people who are running it and maybe even fear them. I also want to ask you for us about something that the Vice President, J.D. Vance, said today. He was asked about the state of negotiations. Take a listen.
Fundamentally, the ball is in the Iranians' court. Now, I think the president has talked about this. One thing I will say is that the Iranians were not the fastest negotiators before the war started, and they are certainly not the fastest negotiators now. So we recognize there's some delay sometimes in transmitting messages from one person to another, but we feel confident that we can get a response, whether it's positive or negative. We're going to get a response from the Iranians by 8 o'clock tonight.
What are you expecting by 8 o'clock tonight? What are the possibilities here?
I think it's important to point out to the viewers that the president has levied those kind of ultimatums before, at least on 2 occasions, only to walk them back to say that there's been some degree of progress in the negotiations that merits for them to continue. I wouldn't at all be surprised if we're faced with that kind of scenario tonight. Already, it seems that Vice President Vance is echoing and perhaps laying the ground for Iran to make some kind of a concession. We are not privy to the details of the talks. At an official level, the U.S. has put forward some 15 points, all maximalist in their approach. The Iranians have responded by actually turning those down and putting forward 10 points of their own, also maximalist in nature. But behind the scenes, we know that there are intricate negotiations taking place. The Pakistanis, the Turks, the Egyptians, all involved in that. So I wouldn't at all be surprised that if by 8 o'clock tonight, this ends up being a nothing burger and President Trump finds a way to climb down and to continue negotiating. Now, the war continues, the bombing continues, but you're not going to be seeing anything that is much different from what we've seen before.
Colonel Jack Jacobs and Firas Maksad, thank you both.